So this is the Blaxploitation Podcast. My name is Asia Floyd.
I'm Ashley Walker.
And I'm Jack White.
And obviously our genre is Blaxploitation. A little background about Blaxploitation. Pretty much the era was 1971 to 1976. And pretty much it was the rise of political and social consciousness of Black people, more Black people being featured in films and appealing to Black urban audiences. And the lead of Blaxploitation, the way how it led to this was due to the emergence after the Civil Rights Movement and the Vietnam War. And we just wanted to see more Black people in the entertainment industry. And there was a guy named Junius Griffin. He founded the Coalition Against Blaxploitation back in 1972, and he was pretty much against this because he didn't want Black children to basically see like the stereotypes and like the violence and the struggles of Black communities featured in films. So that's pretty much like a brief background history of Blaxploitation.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you guys want to add more onto that or.
Well, first, I think it's important to think that not only is Blaxploitation like an important era, in one aspect of the Black community and Black history and film, but also to recognize that there was like an opposite perspective within the Black community about it,
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't all black and white, so to speak. Like Black people supported it and white people didn't. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah. And I think, I guess one of the last things I'll add is that, this was a result of a long time coming, like a really turbulent social, political, and economic climate. And the civil rights movement played a huge part in the birth and the emergence of the Blaxploitation era. And, as a result of this, like the Black audience wanted to see themselves fully depicted on screens a lot more. And so this led to, the outspoken African Americans telling Hollywood that, we need to see ourselves on screen. And I think that that's really important too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the downfall of it, I feel like, wasn't like many Blaxploitation films. They were still like being controlled by like white production companies, I guess.
Yeah, I mean that's like the significant part about the economics of it all, right? Is that
Yeah.
they were limited to the confines set by like the production companies and what they expected because they handled the flow of money so that the content for the most part could be what they wanted, but they still had this little voice in the back of their head that they didn't have total freedom yet.
Mm-hmm.
At least creatively.
Right.
There's this quote in the reading that we had in Trying to Get Over Superfly, and the author wrote, "Blaxploitation films were, quote, a case of whites financially and thematically exploiting Black audiences." And then went on to say that they were Black films, but they were white profits. And I think that that's a really good summary of what that whole era pretty much was.
Definitely.
Can you guys see that just like unfortunately still ringing true in a lot of aspects though, like just for a lot of things? Like that seems to be a reoccurring, at least economic theme in a lot of these, especially in like the cinema Black films, I mean, as early as, the first major film, or the first like significant large film, which is Birth of a Nation.
Right.
That's the exploitation of Black people for the profit of white people,
I definitely see it happen in today's society with the entertainment industry and like white production companies, just like forcing those stereotypes in Black movies for audiences to see. So I definitely agree with you on that.
I agree with y'all too. There was at one point, I think, like you said, Jack, when Birth of a Nation came out, and what was that movie, The Help? There was this like period of 2 years where I think there were like easily 5 to 6 blockbuster movies about Black people being enslaved, and
Yeah.
it was kind of like, why are all of these movies coming out right now? And if you look behind them, they were produced by mostly white production companies.
Yep.
And it's like, why is this the only topic that we can talk about?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's so like, do you think it's still like more of a sinister intent, or do you think it's more of just like this overall sense of naivete that just sort of like we have yet to really confront because our nation is so scared to be able to talk about like some of these issues? Do you know what I mean by that?
Definitely. I think it's a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I think it's kind of like a cause and effect. Like, because we're so afraid to talk about these issues, the cycles of, racism and stereotypes, they just keep being perpetuated. And because of that, because we don't talk about those things, or because there's the people in Hollywood choose to, ignore the conversations about those things, we constantly keep getting the same films. You know what I mean? It's like this vicious cycle of, partial naivete, but also like a lot of ignorance as well.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree.
And I feel like um, a large part of that is like both economic and societal. It's that people won't have these conversations, but people also aren't motivated in any reason to have these conversations. There's no like committee on film awards, especially in America, that's like, centered around inclusion or the standards set by these films and whether or not like they go too far. I mean, I feel like there should have been some sort of committee that gave feedback or like really read into the helpfulness of you know these white savior movies that you're talking about, or these movies that put um the movies like The Help and whatever, it like what is the real motivation behind that, and maybe some sort of more like communication between
Mm-hmm.
the people and the producers, so to speak.
Right.
And that's one of the main themes of Blaxploitation, right? Like this whole Black and white savior complex. And that's another thing that's important to talk about too, is how these 5 major themes pretty much define this entire era, and how they made it what it was, but also to some extent, that's where its downfall as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I think like a big theme was, well, I think it was what, the Black Warrior, like that was like the savior,
Mm-hmm.
or like against like what, like white organization, stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And I feel like, I guess we could talk about like the movie Superfly. The main character, his name was Priest, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you guys say like he was a Black warrior in that movie? Like,
Absolutely.
I would agree.
yeah, because he was trying to get out of the world of selling drugs and not working for the white man. I
Yeah.
remember I think his best friend Eddie, he was like, well, oh, I'm comfortable, working for them as long as, as I listen to them, they don't do anything to me. I'm comfortable, just working for somebody, and
Mm-hmm.
pretty much like working like a slave for them. And Priest was not comfortable with that, and he was trying to get out of that. So
Yeah.
that's how I kind of see a warrior in Superfly.
Well, I think the Black Warrior character in Superfly specifically is really interesting because again, it's like this sort of, even though there was the issue of these films being made by white producers and those companies taking like a large majority of the profits, this film specifically kind of takes like a little hidden jab at that whole process.
Mm-hmm.
It's like literally a film about black people trying to get out from under the like working boot of the white man
Mm-hmm.
in these situations. And that's kind of like what's happening in real life, you know, within context of that movie itself. So it's almost sort of like bringing attention to that whole process while
Right.
also making, like, I feel like one of the big things is, although a lot of this can be seen as problematic, a lot of it is more metaphorical than it is like a direct one for one translation, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's
Definitely.
not saying everybody should be like a drug dealer kingpin and fight the man and all that, but it's more metaphorical or allegorical, I guess.
I agree with y'all. I think Superfly was probably like the I think it was one of the best movies from this class that we discussed with regards to the Blaxploitation era because it really did outline all five of the main themes that you see in Blaxploitation. Like it had that black warrior savior against the white, the white police officers, and it had that the hypersexual, hypersexual like male appetite. And Priest was with Georgia, but he was also with um what was the white woman's name? I'm blanking on it right now.
I forget her name, but I know who you're
Yeah,
talking.
you guys know who I'm talking about. He was kind of a player in a way. Um, and it had a lot of black aesthetics in clothing and slang and music. And
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
there were also a lot of those stereotypical like blaxploitation arcs that were really popular at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the other movies, I guess that we'll discuss in a second, they had some of those stereotypes and some of those themes, but this one really pulled them all together. You
Mm-hmm.
know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is a very like unified sense of like a black aesthetic, and that's why, you know, I think a lot of people can make the argument that it's more of like this the great archetype or benchmark for a blaxploitation film because it
Mhm.
just again does have all those five themes and um it it's a great example.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ash. I think it's like one of the best to represent the blaxploitation genre.
So would you guys say that Sweet Sweetback's badass song goes a little bit past Superfly's terms of like what it's talking about or pushing the boundaries of the black aesthetic in a film like this? Or do you think it's more of like um it's more of like a response to Superfly and a different opinion about it, like a different take on it?
Can you just like explain
Yeah.
the Sweet Sweet Badass
Yeah.
song real quick?
So Superfly is more about like making a palpable sort of action flick for the audiences, right? While
Okay.
Sweet Sweetback's badass song is a little bit more, I would almost say like experimental, like with some of its elements. Like it has, some really long edits and tracking shots, and you know, um, it's directed by Melvin Van Peebles and some of his, uh, you know, putting sex at the forefront, especially. Like there's two major sex scenes, I think, um, that I just didn't see in other movies like this that like push it that far. So what do
Mhm.
you think about some of those things? Like why is sex so important,
Um,
if at all?
I think that whole theme in blaxploitation is definitely rooted in racist stereotypes that go way back when. I remember learning about, when one of the reasons that white people were afraid of Black people way back in the day, and one of the things that they used to justify their racism was that, you know, Black men are predators. They're these like sex crazed men that are after, you know, white women, and they're after your wives and your children. And um so I think that, you know, because the civil rights movement just happened right before a lot of these films were made, and a lot of those stereotypes were still obviously, you know, going strong, that
Mhm.
definitely influenced this movie a lot. You know, whether, you know, I'm sure that the people that like wrote the script probably wouldn't admit to that too much, but I think it definitely played a role in it. Um, and I think, like you said, Jack, I don't think that it necessarily should be all about sex, but I understand why, you know, in this movie, I guess what the purpose of it is, but it's just interesting how that theme that theme is rooted in a lot of racism and a lot of harmful stereotypes, and just, you know, this is one of the cons of the Blaxploitation era,
Yeah.
that it highlights a lot of these like not so good things, despite, you know, a lot of the good that it brought entertainment wise.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think sex is like a really interesting way to show that sort of fight to regain its own control over Black sexuality, you know, even if it may be problematic, like through our contemporary perspective, it was important regardless, especially back then, to sort of like fight to reclaim that, you know, essentially reclaim their bodies and how they're depicted in these movies.
I agree.
Yep. And then I guess we could wrap this up with how we see the impacts or legacy of Blaxploitation today in society.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
you could say, you know, I would say like, unfortunately, with the tragedy of Chadwick Boseman passing, like
Mm-hmm.
the closest thing we could see to almost like a Blaxploitation aesthetic is almost like Black Panther, almost, you know, like that's the amalgamation of like a strong warrior,
Yep.
male driven, like reclamation story, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
um I mean,
Man,
there's,
this fast hit me hard.
yeah, I
It
mean,
did.
when there's this really incredible speech that Chadwick Boseman gives about how Denzel Washington
Yes.
paid for his school tuition, um,
I
and how,
almost cried during that speech.
yeah, and at the same time, Denzel Washington was, you know, one of the major Black actors that was breaking down a lot of barriers and creating roles
Mm-hmm.
for other men, particularly, which is another, you know, long issue of this struggle that like women have had a lot harder time. But I guess another like inclusion would also be, you know, strong female Black actresses like Zendaya, um, landing roles like, you know, lead roles in hit shows like Euphoria, or like Lupita Nyong'o winning best, I think it was like supporting actress and stuff like 12 Years a Slave,
Mm-hmm.
you
I would
know,
say Viola Davis. That
Viola
she won the
Davis.
Oscars for like best supporting. Was it Fences with Denzel Washington? I think.
Yes,
Yeah.
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, I
Um,
think you see it all over today. And it crosses over. I know this is a cinema class, but even into modeling and singing
mhm.
and you know, just
Yep.
so many different aspects of the entertainment industry now, because these people, you know, they paved the way for Black people just across all aspects of the entertainment industry, you know.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Like, despite it being sloppy, and you know, you could all, I think the the biggest detracting part is that a lot of people just try to focus on the negatives.
Right.
While it's important to understand why things were negative or why things may be viewed as problematic, I think in the grand scheme of things, like progress is progress.
Mm-hmm.
And, having a strong visualization of your own aesthetic and your own people and your own culture in the country that you're living in is, I feel like, pretty essential to most people's experiences,
Right.
because it just goes with being seen. And yeah, it's just, I think blaxploitation is one of the most like important and underlooked aspects of like just American cinema specifically.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree too.
I wonder if there's any sort of way that maybe in the future that we can, as a culture, really emphasize this era as a significant film era. Um, I hope so. I hope that someday this can be something we learn about in school books,
Yeah.
high school and whatnot. But I really appreciate all your guys' perspectives, especially, as a white man. This is a really important conversation for a lot of people to have across, all spectrums. So
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I especially appreciate both of your perspectives.
Oh, thanks, Jack. We
Thank
appreciate
you.
you too. We all need to it's important. It can't just be Black people or just white people talking about this,
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
it has to be like unified if we're trying to make any true progress. So
Right. Yes. I appreciate
Absolutely.
both of you guys having this conversation.
Yeah, it was a pleasure talking with both of you and having class with both of you this semester.
Oh, same to you. To both
I
of you
know,
guys.
man. I want to miss it.
And I suppose that wraps up our podcast. Thank you so much for listening, Professor Macon. And yeah, that's our little talk on blaxploitation cinema.